Good afternoon. National Assembly for Wales is now in session, and the first item this afternoon, no, I beg your pardon, have something before the first item. It gives me great pleasure to announce that in accordance with Standing Order 26.75, the Higher Education Wales Bill was given royal assent on the 12th of March. Now we move to the first item on the agenda, which is questions to the First Minister. And the first question is Mohammed Ashgar.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. What plan does the Welsh Government have to improve access to GP surgery in Wales in 2015, please?
Well, our plans to improve access to GP services, which are a key part, of course, of a preventative primary care-led NHS, are set out in our new national plan for a primary care service. It's backed by over £40 million of the new funds and a new 2-year deal with GPs.
Thank you very much, First Minister, for the reply. 4 years ago, you made a manifesto promise to require GPs to hold appointments in the evenings and Saturday mornings. The latest figures show less than half of 1% of GP practices in Wales offer any Saturday appointments, and the percentage of GP practices offering evening appointments fell to just 7% last year. Does the First Minister agree that this pre-election promise back in 2011 was just an undeliverable gimmick, or how long it will take to fulfill this promise?
Well, I don't know where he gets his figures from, but I can tell him that 80% of GP practices are open for daily core hours or within 1 hour of daily core hours. That's an increase of 20 points from 2011. 97% of GP practices offer appointments at any time between 5 and 6:30 on at least 2 days a week, a 5% increase since 2011. 79% of GP practices offer appointments at any time in the later evening between 5 and 6:30 p.m. every day, an increase of 16% from 2011. And the percentage of practices closed for half a day for a week has reduced from 19% in 2011 to 6% in 2014. As I say, I don't know where his figures are from. These are the official figures, and it shows the Welsh Government delivering.
Weekends.
Christine Chapman.
Thank you. First Minister, I recently had a very positive meeting with the Health Minister to discuss capacity issues at surgeries in my constituency. We also discussed the action that is being taken to recruit and retain GPs, particularly in valleys areas. Now, whilst I very much welcome the £1.8 million extra investment that has been announced for primary care services within Cwm Taf, will the Welsh Government continue to work closely with the Health Board to develop the primary and community care workforce and ensure that high calibre staff continue to be attracted to work within the NHS in Wales?
Absolutely, of course, and I know that the local health board are working very hard to make sure that that is the case, and we want to make sure, of course, we attract high calibre staff to all parts of Wales.
Lindsay Biddle.
Well, First Minister, the best way to get access to GPs is to adopt Plaid Cymru's policy of employing 1,000 extra doctors. Will you increase the training places available, please?
I don't know how many GPs are included in that figure. We've never been told, of course, so who knows? And in terms of how to ensure that people can see GPs, the first thing to do is to make sure that people choose well. That they look to go to a pharmacist first, then perhaps go to a nurse within a GP practice, and then go and see the GP. But of course, the number of GPs has risen by more than 11% over the past decade, and that shows, of course, that more GPs than ever are working in Wales.
Kirsty Williams.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, as Llanwtyd and the surrounding communities anxiously await the response by the Builth Wales Medical Practice to the offer put forward to them by Powys Local Health Board, it's been clear there is no national procedure for dealing with the closure of GP surgeries. The CHC don't clearly understand their role in a GP surgery closure situation, and there's no national guidance or protocol. Would you look again at whether it is necessary to have a very clear national approach to handling threats to GP surgeries such as the ones we have in Llanwtyd at the moment?
Well, first of all, of course, the majority of GPs are self-employed contractors. We know that. They're not directly part of the health service in that way. They must explain to the people they serve the reasoning for their decisions. I very much hope, of course, that there will be agreement and that people of Llanwtyd will continue to have access to GP services in their own community. I know the discussions have been, I understand, fruitful in the last few weeks, and I sincerely hope, of course, that service will continue in the future.
Question 2, Joyce Watson.
What assessment has the Welsh Government made of the impact of the bedroom tax in Wales?
Well, our research has shown the impact of the reforms are not spread equally. The bedroom tax has a disproportionate effect on disabled people. And this reform, combined with the remaining UK government's benefit and tax reforms, are hitting those, of course, around the poverty line and working-age disabled households much harder than others.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. But according to research by the Auditor General for Wales, the bedroom tax has indeed hit Wales the hardest. The number of tenants in arrears shot up by a quarter in the 6 months after introduction, and there were more than 2,000 repossessions last year. First Minister, your government is doing what it can to soften the blow with the Discretionary Assistance Fund and the extra 20 million for 1- and 2-bedroom homes. But do you agree with me that the best way, in fact the only way that people can be sure to rid us of this pernicious tax is by voting Labour in the next general election?
Absolutely, absolutely. What we've seen, of course, is an attack on the most vulnerable in society. We know that the number of claimants affected by the bedroom tax in Wales was £31,000 as of November, 31,000 people rather, as of November last year. We know that the reforms will reduce the income of working-age households in Wales by around 900 million in 2015 to 16. We estimate an average annual loss of £500 per working-age adult in Wales, and we know that the tax and welfare reforms hit those around the poverty line harder than middle and higher income groups, typical, of course, of the Tories.
Jonathan Saunders.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, statements such as these serve little purpose other than to scaremonger, especially when there was no mention whatsoever of the valid exemptions available for those with disabilities. Sheer hypocrisy. In 2001, the Labour government actually trialled the policy through the under-occupation pilot scheme, and then in 2008 went on to introduce this for private tenancies. First Minister, will you acknowledge the £830 million saved to date and that the housing benefit bill has fallen for the first time in a decade? Or do you endorse the something-for-nothing culture that has ultimately contributed towards the massive debts our country now faces?
There's a rank hypocrisy in the Tories, isn't there? Rank hypocrisy. They sit there claiming to represent the vulnerable. They attack the vulnerable, that much we know. You know, how wonderful it is, of course, to hear them say we've reduced the housing benefit budget. What they mean is we've attacked those people who need help the most. And that's why, of course, the bedrooms are. And yeah, I go around as members, and these benches will go around, and we listen to people who are affected by this bedroom tax. We see the effect it has on them, and we see that they are the people who are most affected and who most need help in society. I will not accept any lectures from the Conservative Party when they sit there hypocritically telling us they represent the vulnerable when their main task is to hit the vulnerable and protect the rich. That's why, of course, they've cut taxes for the richest in society.
Roger Glyn-Thomas.
The concept of voting Labour to avoid the impacts of the bedroom tax are ironic, to say the least, because the SNP government in Scotland has ensured that tenants in Scotland aren't impacted by that particular tax. The government in Northern Ireland has come to a deal with the Treasury to ensure that it isn't implemented in Northern Ireland. Wales is the only devolved nation in the UK which is impacted by this bedroom tax, although the people of Wales have voted for a Labour government.
Well, I don't think that Plaid Cymru is going to make a great deal of difference on this tax. First instance, the benefits have been devolved in Northern Ireland, not in Scotland and Wales, but it's true to say that Scotland has found the money, but what Scotland has done is used its funding where they should use the United Kingdom funding. So all that's happened is that the Treasury has shifted the blame and shifted the duty to Scotland, and Scotland is having to pay for something that should be paid for by the UK. So once again, we should ensure, for the benefit of everyone in the UK, that people get rid of this UK government in May to ensure fairness in the United Kingdom as a whole.
We now move to questions.
Not all will agree with that, clearly.
I didn't hear, so that's... I now call the party leaders to question the First Minister, and first is the leader of Welsh Liberal Democrats, Kirsty Williams.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, in response to the McLennan review of the ambulance service, your Health Minister said that we needed, and I quote, an ambiguous agreement on its nature as a clinical service. do you agree that the Ambulance Trust needs to focus on delivering a clinically led emergency response service?
Yes.
Well, thank you, First Minister. Could you explain then that if it has been deemed clinically appropriate that an individual does not need an ambulance, then why are the Welsh Ambulance Service Trust footing the bill for taxis to hospital? Your government has said that it is committed to prudent health care. Is spending thousands of pounds ferrying 100 people to hospital truly value for money and enabling the Ambulance Trust to do its job?
Well, the proportion of patients transported by taxi as part of the Alternative Transport Initiative is approximately 0.1% of the 450,000 calls that are made to the ambulance service. The cost of conveying a patient by emergency ambulance to A&E is approximately £183. Using a taxi where appropriate can be as little as £4. Now, the figure that she has mentioned, and the figure that we've seen today on the news, also includes money spent on the patient care service, for example, where a patient requires transport to an outpatient appointment and there's limited capacity available. Health courier services, conveying laundry and test results and blood where appropriate, and to transport staff back to a scene that they've had to, where they've had to leave a vehicle to support the patients, for example, on a spinal board. So that figure is not just about taxis, it's about a number of services that are offered by the ambulance service in a non-emergency context.
First Minister, we said that we needed a clinically led ambulance service. If a decision has been made by a clinician that you do not need the care of a paramedic or an ambulance technician to convey you to hospital, it does beg the question, why is the ambulance service then paying for taxis? It's been 2 years since Professor McClelland outlined her recommendations for the future of the ambulance service, and 2 years since she recommended that work should begin to transfer patient transport services out of the Ambulance Trust and into health boards so that we could have a better use of resources in conveying those patients who do indeed need to get to a hospital, but they don't need an ambulance to do so. In the latest update last month, it appeared that little or no work had been carried out on this recommendation. When can we expect to see health boards take responsibility for patient transports so that the ambulance service is allowed to focus on getting to those people who need it the most as quickly as possible?
Well, it's not correct to say that nothing's been done. There's a pilot scheme in Cardiff which gave rise to the story that we saw this morning, and that is to see how best to divert people away from needing to use an ambulance in circumstances where they don't need to use an ambulance. But let's not pretend this is an issue only for Wales. In 2008 to 11, England spent £30 million on taxi transport as part of transport within the health service. So it is something that is commonly used across the whole of the UK. And of course, the pilot scheme will be there in order to assist evaluation on how to improve non-emergency patient care in the future.
We now move to Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Archie-Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, what's your assessment of your government's campaign, which was held last September, to support your high street?
Well, we are looking, of course, at business rates to see how business rates can help those businesses that need further help. We have, for example, provided funds for towns to be refurbished and to be revitalised. We've done that, of course, through various schemes. And, of course, we've made sure that by bringing investment into Wales, creating more jobs into Wales, people have more money to spend, and that will help small businesses.
First Minister, that campaign was launched in September last year, and at its heart it had a window dressing campaign, it had a treasure hunt in Lampeter, and the great success was that 274,000 people had looked at Facebook and Twitter. Ultimately, First Minister, from the figures we saw yesterday, there is a huge pressure on our high streets. 18 months ago, we brought forward our document Vision for the High Streets. At the moment, we are seeing, because of your government's inaction, one shop every other day closing on our high streets. Now, you talked about business rate relief, you talked about planning, you've talked about various initiatives. We've had 3 different ministers from your government been responsible for regeneration of our high streets since 2011. But actually, we're not seeing anything really tangible delivered. We've got real pressure on the Welsh high streets and little coming from your government. What can we expect over the next 12 months to actually reverse these declining numbers on the Welsh high street that sees vacancy rates some of the worst in the UK?
Well, I did hear the member for Weinidogion protest at the way that Lampeter was portrayed there. She will do it more effectively than I, given the fact that it's in her constituency. But can I say that in order for shops to prosper, they need customers. Customers. Now, we have done what we can to bring in investment into Wales and to create jobs. We need the UK government to do its part. The reason why so many shops are struggling is because of the policies of the UK government not providing people with light at the end of the tunnel, not providing people with hope, destroying people's disposable incomes. That's why shops haven't got customers, because of the inaction of the party opposite.
What a ludicrous answer, First Minister. I mean, frankly, we've got an economy that is surging ahead of the rest of the Western world. We've got greater employment now than we've ever had in our history. But yet, when it actually falls into your lap, you want to pass that blame. As I pointed out, you've had 3 ministers responsible for regeneration here in Wales since 2011 elections. We have some of the highest vacancy rates on our high street. You have failed to deliver a business rate relief scheme to the high street that the FSB and other operators have been calling for. Your planning system is overly bureaucratic and delays businesses being innovative and changing to meet the challenge of the internet. You've got so many tools at your disposal, yet your efforts are lamentable. What, over the next 12 months, can we actually see you delivering to reverse the figures that I've given you today, where 1 every other day shop is closing on our high street?
I know he doesn't understand market principles, but those of us on these benches might try and help him. Businesses thrive because of demand for their products, and that demand is driven by people's disposable incomes. They do not have the disposable incomes they had 5 years ago. In 5 years ago, in 2010. That's what's happening to our businesses. Can I also say this to him as well? I mean, he sits there claiming that the UK government has no role in this at all, but as I mentioned before, he cannot escape responsibility for the squeeze that has occurred on people's incomes. But he is trying to do that. He cannot avoid responsibility either for his own party's plans, which is to cut the amount of money available to business. 30% cut in economic development funding, 12% cut in local government funding. Now, how is that meant to assist businesses in Wales? He asked the question. It's a fair question. What can we expect over the next year? It's a fair question. I'll give him the answer. A Labour government in May, and then things will change for the better.
We now move to Plaid Cymru, and the question this afternoon will be asked by the Deputy Leader, Ellen Jones.
Prif Weinidog.
First Minister, in the 4 years since the 2011 census, what's the major steps that your government has taken to prevent the decline of the Welsh language as a living language in communities in West Wales?
Well, first of all, the first thing that we'll ensure is an increase in the number. It's been disappointing, and that was true when your party was in government also. Second, of course, we'll ensure that people use the language. We've done that by helping the Mentrau Iaith through the Bwrwm Line programme and ensuring that funding is available for centres where the Welsh language can be used as the natural speaking language, especially where communities where the Welsh language has deteriorated.
First Minister, I know what needs to be done. What I want to know is how are you going to achieve what needs to be done? One of the most influential areas in terms of the strength of the Welsh language is the area of planning. In order to safeguard the Welsh language, we must make the Welsh language a statutory material consideration and provide more power for local authorities to set their own housing targets. Now, there is one legislative opportunity available to you as a government to introduce this in legislation, namely the planning bill. Do you intend to take that opportunity, or will you ignore it?
Well, we can do this now, of course. They can use the Welsh language as a consideration, and secondly, they can ensure that they do set their own targets about housing. Where they disagree with what the government has said, where there is evidence to support another target, they can do that. There's nothing to stop them from doing that now.
No, they can't do that, and that's why the county councils, of course, have written to you. Many of them, including some Labour councils, have written to you asking you to take this legislative opportunity provided by the planning bill to strengthen their hand in taking decisions on the basis of the Welsh language in planning cases, and also to carry out assessments of local housing need in accordance with the needs of those local communities. So the councils disagree with what you've just said. Will you therefore listen to them? listen to many of us as opposition parties who also want to see the bill, the only legislative opportunity you have in the remainder of this assembly, being used to strengthen the ability of the Welsh language to survive in our Welsh-speaking communities?
Well, three things. First of all, they can do that. They can set their own targets if they have the evidence. Second, we have changed the bill to strengthen the Welsh language component. And if there are any sensible ideas about how we can move forward, we can include those. What we can't do is support a situation where every application would have to have some sort of language assessment. I don't think that anybody is suggesting that, but the truth is, where do you draw the line? What kind of scheme should have an assessment? What kind shouldn't have an assessment? And in what way do we ensure that somebody tries to go from one line to another and avoid the rules? So work has been done on that up till now. We're willing to continue those discussions to find more ways to safeguard the Welsh language in our Welsh-speaking communities in future.
We now move back to questions on the paper, and it's question 3. Alan Fred-Jones.
Thank you. Will the First Minister make a statement on Welsh for adult centres?
We are implementing the recommendations of the Welsh for Adults Review Group and establishing what's called a national entity to lead the sector strategically, and following an interim year to allow the entity to establish from the 1st of August 2016, the centres will cease to exist and the entity will lead the providers.
Thank you very much. As we know, the teaching of second language in our schools has proved to be a failure and has been harshly criticised, and there has been no movement following 2 years since publication of that critical report. In terms of these centres and the process that you've just described in creating this national entity, well, that body must be credible, with practical experience and a record of success, but it's an internal process, as I understand it, this tender process. It's hidden from public view, and in fairness to those organisations who have introduced bids and to ensure transparency, will you appoint an independent adjudicator to ensure fairness within this system?
Well, first of all, the reason why nothing has changed since Shauna Davis's report was published was the fact that because the Professor Donaldson has reported on the curriculum itself, so it makes sense for one to feed into another, which is exactly what has happened. Second, of course, I don't see whether there is any kind of problem about independence of the system. We are considering the applications that have been put forward at present. I don't see any evidence to say that there is any problem about the fairness of that situation.
Susie Davis.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, in your evidence to the Committee for the Scrutiny of the Work of the First Minister last week, you said that you had published a toolkit to assess the impacts of policy decisions on the Welsh language. Now, if that toolkit had been implemented last year, do you think that you would have taken the same decision to actually close or abolish the budget for Welsh for Adult centres?
Well, remembering the financial situation, what we've tried to do is to decide where the funding should be spent and to prioritise that. We've ensured that capital funding is available for the Welsh language centres, and in moving forward, we're working with every body that supports the Welsh language in our communities. Where there is a situation where there is less funding it's available, of course, it's very important to prioritise where that funding goes.
Question 4, Nick Ramsey.
Will the First Minister make a statement on Welsh Government policies for promoting renewable energy?
Well, we're committed to promoting and supporting renewable energy projects and maximising their economic and environmental benefits to Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. As you'll be aware, 4 of the proposed new possible hydroelectric tidal lagoons have been earmarked off the Welsh coast, 2 of them in the Severn estuary. I appreciate this is early days, but the potential of these lagoons for future power generation is enormous, with a possibility of around 7% of England and Wales' overall power generation. Do you agree with me that these lagoons represent a potential reliable power source without some of the wider implications of a barrage or indeed visually intrusive wind farms? And will your government be negotiating with both the companies involved and with the UK government to make sure that Wales does benefit more from tidal energy than we have in the past?
Well, bear in mind, of course, that the problem is we have very little powers at the time being in terms of marine energy. 1 megawatt actually is the limit. We know, of course, of the proposals that have been put forward as a result of the St David's Day process, which we welcome. That will give us more control and, more importantly, the ability to promote renewable energy in the way that we would want. The difficulty is, of course, that we don't control the ROCs, the Renewables Obligation Certificates, as Scotland does, and that means we're not able to offer as much money as Scotland does because of their control of their subsidy regime, which is why Scotland have done better than we have, despite the fact their circumstances are less promising, because there's been more money. They've been able to put more money on the table. They've been permitted to put more money on the table in the way that we have not. But I take his point. I think that there's great potential for tidal energy in Wales. And the key will be, and this is something that we have spent time evaluating, that there are jobs onshore as well. We believe, for example, that Port Talbot is in a very good position as a deep dock to act as a maintenance and manufacturing base, and potentially, if they go further west, Milford Haven as well.
Peter Black.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, one of the reasons why renewable energy is being promoted by the UK government is, of course, to provide energy security, as well as the environmental impact as well. But that is also one of the reasons why they're promoting fracking as a means of extracting additional energy sources. Given the Welsh Government's stance on fracking, which I wholly agree with, what attitude is the government taking towards test drilling, which of course is the first stage towards fracking? Will you be able to give guidance on that as well?
Well, as far as boreholes are concerned, that is a matter for local authorities to determine. The position we have taken is against fracking, against the obtaining of shale gas. That is, we believe, a strong message that is being sent to the industry as to the government's view on the extraction of shale gas and indeed fracking. Energy security is absolutely crucial. The member's right. But that does not mean, of course, that we should try to obtain energy at any cost. And that, of course, is the reason why the Minister has taken the action that he has.
Question 5, Lynn Eagle.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's current free entry policy to National Museums Wales sites?
Yes, of course. The programme for government commits us to the policy of free entry to the 7 museums run by Amgueddfa Cymru, National Museum Wales.
First Minister, I know that you're aware of my opposition to charging for underground tours at Big Pit National Coal Museum, proposals which fly in the face of our free entry policy. I'm very grateful to the Director of National Museums Wales for meeting with me to discuss this proposal. And while I do understand the huge savings that they have to make, I do believe that the underground tour is the very heart of Big Pit and brings to life our industrial heritage in a truly unique way. First Minister, will you take the opportunity today to rule out charges for the underground tour?
I thank the member for her interest, Big Pit, of course, being in her constituency. And I can say to her there will be no charges for underground tours at Big Pit. That has been made clear to the National Museum, and the National Museum understand, of course, that they are obliged to keep to the programme for government's commitments.
William Graham.
I'm most grateful to the First Minister for his statement just now. I'm sure it will reassure many people in the Glenavon area. Free entry has coincided with an average of 110% increase in visitors to Big Pit, which clearly to be encouraged, but only 15% increase to the Roman Museum and Baths and Amphitheatre at Caerleon. Has your government looked at the implications for this considerable difference between the increase in attraction?
Well, first of all, we must welcome the fact there has been an increase. It's right to say that Big Pit has had a particularly impressive increase. It is quite unique in that sense, as is, of course, Caerleon with the amphitheatre there. But, of course, Big Pit began life as a paid-for attraction before it came into the National Museum. And now, of course, we've seen more and more people understanding that the underground tour is free. And, of course, it means that we have more and more visitors. And it's important, of course, for us to remember the rich heritage that the mining industry created both in South Wales, but also in Pembrokeshire and in the northeast of Wales as well.
Bethan Jenkins.
First Minister, you will know that National Museums Wales have had in-year cuts on top of cuts already forced on them by the Welsh Government. I've spoken to the Director General on numerous occasions, so they're now in a predicament of having to change staff working conditions or close specific sites or end the free entry. So they're looking at changing the terms and conditions, which obviously is very unpopular. I wonder what discussions your government has had with them to try and seek an alternative to this particular predicament, because of course only the population of Wales will suffer if they have to pay for access to these most vital public attractions.
Well, I would say to the member what I said some moments ago, namely there will be no payment for entry into any of the National Museum's attractions. It's right to say, of course, that where there are exhibitions within the National Museum particularly that come from time to time, that they are paying attractions, but there will be no payment for the museum's ordinary offering, and particularly no payment for the underground Torquay pit.
William Powell.
Diolch Llawedd. First Minister, you may have received the news that last week the Brecon Beacons National Park Planning Authority gave the go-ahead to a multi-million-pound redevelopment in the heart of Brecon around the museum and gallery, which has been funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund and supported also by Powys County Council. And it will incorporate a heritage and cultural hub which will greatly enrich experience in that area. First Minister, I hope you'll join me in welcoming this good news, which goes back, I think, to the days of the partnership government and was spearheaded very much in that early time by my colleague Baroness Jenny Radisson of Roath Park. And will you, First Minister, give a guarantee that the Welsh Government will look in the future to giving its support, financial and in other ways, to encouraging such important developments of this kind?
Well, I join the member, of course, in welcoming the proposals. He tests my memory when he talks about the partnership government, but nevertheless, I take his word on that point. Well, of course, from our point of view, we could not revenue fund any new development. He will know that, but he will also know, of course, that capital assistance is available for good projects across Wales.
Christine Chapman on National Museums.
Thank you. I was delighted when the Cynon Valley Museum Trust was established to take over the running of the museum in Aberdare when it faced closure last year. Importantly, the trustees have retained a policy of free entry for when the museum is open. First Minister, will you join with me in congratulating the Council, museum trustees and local community for making this happen? And what plans has the Welsh Government to support community groups such as this in the future?
Yes, I thank the member for the question. I've been impressed by the positive way the Council, the Trust and the local community are now collaborating to keep the local museum open. Of course, running a museum does require a long-term commitment. We understand that. I can say that Cymal, which of course, as the member will know is a division of the Welsh Government, does provide specialist advice, support and training to any organisation which demonstrates a willingness to work to the national standards, in other words, the accreditation scheme for museums and galleries in the United Kingdom. So that assistance is available in order to make sure that museums reach the standard that I'm sure they would want to reach anyway.
Question 6, Mike Hedges.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the importance of Wales higher education establishments in developing the Welsh economy?
Well, they make a huge contribution to our economy. They're large local employers that generate highly skilled graduates. They attract investment. They stimulate the growth of spin-out and start-up companies. And of course, as demonstrated by Wales's great results in the recent Research Excellence Framework, they conduct research with real social and economic impact.
Can I thank you for that response? As you just said, with the research being carried out at Welsh universities, especially Swansea and Cardiff, being amongst the best in the world, what more can be done to use that research expertise to develop the Welsh economy?
Well, I think it's fair to say that universities have in the past few years understood better their role as economic drivers, and in particular their role in working with businesses and potential entrepreneurs to roll out and commercialise the knowledge that the universities create. I dare say that 10 years ago that wasn't quite as clear as far as universities were concerned. But it's absolutely right to say, and I'll give you one example, the Smart Innovation Support Programme, that we are focused on driving research with a clear emphasis on, first of all, larger, discrete strategic projects, but also, of course, to make sure that we create research that has a social and economic benefit at the end of it. And I very much welcome the fact that our universities have bought in to that idea. And we see now, of course, the spin-offs around Cardiff University,
We see the spin-offs as a result of the Institute of Life Sciences in Swansea, and of course the great work being done in other universities, in all our other universities in Wales, in terms of making sure that the knowledge they generate generates a benefit for the local community.
Paul Davis.
Diolch Llywydd. Prif Weinidog, fel chi'n...
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, as you're aware, Pembrokeshire College provide higher education courses for local people, which is very important for the Pembrokeshire economy. In light of the closure of the Mirco refinery, it's crucially important that there are HE opportunities available in the area to develop people's skills further. So what additional support can you as a government provide to ensure that Pembrokeshire College can prepare additional higher education courses to support the local economy?
Well, this is, of course, something that's happened in several colleges, which is the aim to ensure that there is integration happening between the further education colleges and universities. I welcome that. I think it gives an opportunity to many young people who perhaps don't have the confidence to move away from home to ensure that they can have a higher education in their own communities and give them the confidence to do so in future, perhaps. We're willing to work with the colleges and the universities to ensure that that process does continue in future.
First Minister, will you also, in the same vein, recognise the considerable achievements of places like Coleg y Cymoedd in Nangarrow, my constituency, built on the site of the former Nangarrow Colliery, and the 3 students who have recently been accepted into Oxbridge universities through the educational programmes there, including my one particular constituent, Callum Haggart, who from Tonyrefel, who captained Wales under-18s to victory last weekend. Would you be willing to write to those students to actually congratulate them on their achievement? And do you actually recognise the particular role that colleges like Coleg y Cymoedd actually play in educational excellence in Wales and the long-term benefits to the Welsh economy?
Well, your constituent sounds like a true polymath, in the sense of being one of those people good at sport and academically good as well. I mean, the sort of people who we all do in school. The important point is this. I would obviously offer my congratulations to these students, as I would offer my congratulations to all students who go forward to higher education and other forms of education in Wales. But he mentions the Oxbridge process. It's good to see youngsters making sure that youngsters feel that they're able to apply to the Oxbridge universities in a way perhaps that wouldn't have occurred to them in years gone by. But it is an early indicator, of course, that the strategy, as indicated to us by Paul Murphy, of encouraging more youngsters to apply for the Oxford universities is beginning to bear fruit.
Question 7, Julie Morgan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What plans does the Welsh Government have to increase childcare provision in Wales?
Well, ensuring access to affordable, high-quality childcare for all children and families across Wales, especially the most disadvantaged, remains one of our top priorities. And of course, it's central to our tackling poverty agenda and the early years and childcare.
Thank you, First Minister, for that response. I welcome Welsh Labour's commitment to double the amount of childcare available for 3- and 4-year-olds to help working parents, because I think this is absolutely essential. But can the First Minister use his influence to try to persuade HMRC to continue to provide a lease for a workplace nursery at the Inland Revenue in Llanishen, in my constituency of Cardiff North, as the present nursery is due to close on August the 29th, and I think it is vital we keep all forms of childcare going.
Yes, I remember in 2012 the member was particularly vociferous in the campaign to keep the provision at HMRC as a result of the stance that she took and perhaps a little in terms of the letter that I wrote in October 2012. The nursery contract was then renewed. Now, of course, it faces expiry in terms of the present contract by October this year. I will write once again to urge HMRC to continue this provision, because we know that it fulfills such an important duty in terms of enabling people to go to work. I mean, those with children will have recognised that from years gone by, and those with children know. But I will write to HMRC along the same lines as I wrote in 2012, and I will once again make clear the strong views of so many in her constituency and beyond, and in particular, of course, the campaign that she has led both now and in years gone by.
Byron Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, a really good news story is the Westminster Government's increased childcare provision, and especially the introduction of tax-free childcare. This is creating a true choice for parents about whether to return to work or stay at home. Will you, First Minister, join me in welcoming these improvements in childcare provision to date by the current UK Government, and also outline how you are ensuring childcare provision is maximised in Wales?
We already have childcare provision, of course, that we have taken forward, but I hear what the member says. He wishes to see childcare extended. I extend the invitation to him to welcome the commitment made by my party, both at the UK level and here in Wales.
Ellen Parrott.
Diolch Llywydd. One significant gap is wraparound care, particularly for working parents who want to take advantage of their free 2.5-hour nursery place, but can't find a local childcare provider to deliver and collect a child for such a short placement. Authorities in England offer vouchers to working parents which can be used as part payment at a full-time nursery, and some also offer 2.5 full days a week rather than 5 half days a week, which working parents report as being hugely beneficial to them. I wonder, what can the Welsh Government do to encourage flexibility from local authorities in the delivery of their statutory nursery provision?
Well, she seems to advocate nursery vouchers that I can see. Now, it's important, of course, that the flexibility is there. I understand that. But I would not want to see a system whereby existing provision is undermined by the use of vouchers. It's a matter for local authorities, of course, to consider how best to provide the childcare that they are obliged to provide. And, of course, I'm sure they will study what happens in some authorities in England with interest.
Question 8, Sandy Mewis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, will you provide an update on the support the Welsh Government is giving to carers in North East Wales?
Yes, Carers Strategies Wales Measure 2010 and, of course, the Social Services and Wellbeing Act 2014 clearly set out our commitment to carers, and we have invested £238,400 to support carers in the north of Wales, including working with young adult carers and GPs.
Thank you for that. I recently joined staff, volunteers and carers at an event which marked the future role of NewKIS, the North East Wales Carers Information Service. I first worked with NewKIS some 21 years ago when it was the Carers Project. Then 65 carers used their service. Now they're more than 8,600 and rather sadly in some ways going up all the time, but what would they do without them? This is an illustration of just how valuable the work of NewKIS has become in North East Wales in giving this support. Their success is an example of local agencies working together. So can I ask you, First Minister, to join me in congratulating NewKIS on the work they're doing? We know the money it saves the NHS, not just here in Wales, but also through the UK. And can I ask you to continue to help carers across Wales access the support and information they need to maintain their own health and well-being?
Can I thank the member for her comments and join with her in the sentiments that she has expressed? I think there are two things worth mentioning. Firstly, our carers strategy sets out our commitment to carers, and a key theme within it is ensuring they have access to information and support, the support and information that they need in order for them to be able to undertake their caring role and to enable them, of course, to maintain their own health and well-being. Also, of course, the Social Services Act will replace the measure, and that will strengthen our commitment to carers, giving them the same rights as people they care for. And I think the commitments that have been made, both in terms of legislation and in terms of the strategy, I hope will show the value that the Welsh Government places on what carers deliver, not just for those they care for, but for society as a whole.
Darren Miller.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, one of the things that carers regularly tell me is that they occasionally need some respite from their caring duties in order that they can recharge their batteries and, of course, to prevent burnout. Given that those short periods of respite can often lead to them being able to undertake and continue their caring duties to a greater extent than they would be able to otherwise, do you think that it would be worthwhile introducing a right to respite for carers in the future, as was a commitment of the Welsh Conservatives in our manifesto in 2011?
Well, all of us, I'm sure, would recognise the importance of respite for carers. That much is true. In terms of a right to respite, well, more work would need to be done in terms of what the cost would be, inevitably, but also in terms of how that would work on a practical basis. So that we could not give a commitment to introducing a right at this stage, although we all recognise, of course, the need for carers to have respite. And the strategy and indeed the legislation, we hope, will move forward in terms of being able to assist with the need for respite in the future.
Question 9, Antoinette Sandbach.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the use of locums in the Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board area?
Well, locum appointments provide essential flexibility in staffing numbers to manage patients safely during peaks in demand or problems with recruitment. It's the responsibility, of course, of local health boards and trusts to determine whether a locum needs to be appointed or agency staff needed, having explored all other options.
I'm grateful for your statement, First Minister. An arbitrary reduction by the Betsy Cadwallader Health Board from a 50% use of locums to a 25% target has led to services being considered unsustainable. How can you justify that when a neighbouring health board operates some of its services on a 75% locum basis and considers that those services are both safe and sustainable?
Any service that relies on non-permanent staff to deliver the majority of its services is not going to be as robust as one where permanent staff do deliver the majority of services. We know, for example, at Ysbyty Glan-Clwyd, with the department, the Obs and Gynae department there, that there has been a strong reliance for some time on temporary staff, with all the difficulties that brings. Now, I referred members, of course, to the letter that all members have seen, a short report from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Nursing Officer, which outlines, of course, the difficulties that currently exist at Ysbyty Glan-Clwyd, but they are difficulties that will need to be resolved. It will take work to resolve them, but as members have heard me say many times, that department must be restored within 12 months, and of course the Saesneg will be placed on a site at Glan-Clwyd.
Llyw Griffith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Some of those locums, of course, have been in place for over 3 years in some cases. Now, if it's not acceptable now, why was it acceptable 3 years ago? I don't really see what's changed. But the truth is, of course, that Betsy Cadwallader has spent £14 million on locums last year, and we know that they claim that there is a shortage of doctors to maintain adequate rotas, but we also know that registrars in the maternity unit in Wrexham have been leaving because of what they describe as a lack of opportunities, while there are deficiencies in the provision in other locations, it's claimed. So can I ask you what steps the government is taking to ensure that doctors are not only trained and recruited but also retained in order to ensure that there is less reliance and less expenditure therefore on locum doctors?
Well, I wasn't aware of what the member was saying about the situation in Wrexham, but what I can say is that Betsy Cadwallader Health Board has taken several steps to recruit permanent doctors. They've gone to headhunting agencies. They've tried to ensure that they look abroad. They've done a great many things to try and recruit. We know that there's a problem with the attitude of the profession to the department, and we know that. But what we need to ensure is that that attitude changes and that people want to go to that department in Glan-Clwyd permanently, not just on a temporary basis. And that's exactly what we as a government want to see happening, and that's what the Health Board wants to do. And I'm sure that that's what the doctors want to see happening, especially the specialists.
Thank you, First Minister. We now move to item 2, which is